Okay, so we're recording. We're here in office hour for lecture 2, and we're talking about how we can iterate through a list of dictionaries, right? And so what we can do is we're going to, let's first off just make up our data. So I'm going to say players equals, and then I'm going to say it's a list. So we use our brackets. And then what I want to do is I'm just going to say something like this. And let's get rid of that. I'm just letting Copilot create some stuff for me. Okay. So here is my list of dictionaries. So each item within my list, this is item 1, item 2, item 3, and item 4. Now, I positioned it in a way to where it's a little bit easier to read, but this is just one long piece. And so really, if we're looking at the input or index position, this is still 0, 1, 2, 3.
Right, because I
Always starts
know
at 0.
all the indexes start at 0 and then they go from there, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you
Okay.
you have four if you have 4 items, it go to 3.
Yep, 100%. So let's just kind of talk about first, how would we iterate through a list? Now we're going to talk about this today in class, but let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new function to do this. The way that we create a function is the def keyword. I'm going to say
Okay,
iterate players.
right.
So I'm creating this. And so what I'm doing is I am, if I just tab, I want to comment this out for a second. I'm
So the
creating a
DEF,
function.
that's how you would declare a function in
Exactly.
Python.
That's the
Okay.
key word in Python in the same way that a capital T for true or in capital F, or if you've got other keywords that we can use, def is whenever Python goes top to bottom, it says, okay, this is a variable I'm declaring, great. It sees this def keyword and it says, okay, great, I'm declaring a function.
Okay.
And so this is my function name, remembering that function names never have spaces in between them. So
Right.
you want to use snake case for that. And then this
I
is
mean, I
my,
mean,
go ahead.
and also one really quick thing. Technically, you could use camel case, but that's something that we generally use
Yeah,
in JavaScript. It's generally more acceptable to use
exactly.
snake case in Python. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's just more of a
So it's
syntax semantics. This would work just fine.
yeah.
But because we're doing this and we want to make sure a big thing when we're writing code is we want to make sure that other developers understand and read our code and can
Okay.
understand and read our code. And so because of that, we want to make sure that we are writing it all in sort of a way. Again, it's not going to break the code if we do it in camel case. But we do it in snake case because that's just kind of how other people do it. And it's a little bit easier for people to read. Because if, so let's say we're writing our code and a developer, which this is probably never going to happen, but has never touched JavaScript in their life, they might get very confused on what does this mean? Why is this a capital? So we want to make sure that we're playing that correctly.
Okay.
Cool. And then after that, we are writing in just what our parameter is. And so we're declaring a function. And we're saying we should expect that this function takes in a value, right? In order for this to work, you have to give me something, right? In order for this function to do what it needs to do, you have to give it something. Here, we're just saying players, but I want to point out that this could be unicorn. All we're doing is we're saying if there's a value here, it's just saying I'm expecting something. Whenever I receive it, how do I want to refer to it? So if I were to do that, I would say, okay, whatever I'm taking in, I'm referring to it as unicorn. So within my code, I would have to refer to unicorn. Does that make sense?
So
Cool.
so the unicorn, that's the parameter.
Yeah, exactly. That's the
Okay.
parameter. And then again, this name is anything we want it to be. Now it makes sense. When we're saying iterate players, we could, say like list of players. Maybe that is a better name because we want it to where we can write comments about our code. That's a good thing, but we want it to where somebody can kind of look at our functions and be like, oh, I understand what this is doing. right? If I
Right.
just said iterate players and then put unicorn here, they might say, well, how does that work? What does that mean? That does not make,
Mhm.
where did you get unicorn? So we'll
Mhm.
call it list of players because that's what we're expecting that this function takes in. Cool.
Right.
There's a couple ways we can do it. One way that I want to talk about is we can say in the same way that def is a keyword for a function, for is a keyword to say that, hey, we are iterating through something. I want to do a for loop, meaning I want you to run the same code over and over and over again. Now,
Right.
there's a couple ways we can do it. You see
So
that.
that's why we're using a diction or a function.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, we
Right.
can run a
Okay.
for loop without a function. But we're just, if we want to do this
Okay.
over and over again, a function's a good way
Right.
to refer
Okay.
back to it.
Mhm.
Now you see that it's saying for player in list of players. We could do that, but we're going to do something else because there's two different ways we can iterate through or do iterate is another keyword for just for loop, right? To where we iterate through all of these values here. So what I can do is I can say in range. And now what this is going to do is this is going to go in range of the index position. So when I'm dealing with in range, it's just talking about the index number. It's not talking about the actual values here.
Mhm.
It's talking about the index number. So let's do that. So if I'm doing in range, and again, we're going to talk about this today in class, but there's 3 arguments I can pass in to this range method. I can pass in where do I want to start? So I could say 0. I can pass when do I want to end, and we'll kind of look at this here in a second. And then how much do I want to go? Or how many, what is my increment? So if I want to
Mhm.
go up by 1 or by 2, I can change that here. Now, if I didn't put this here, it's going to, there's this idea within functions called a default parameter. Do you know what that is?
Right. So basically, um, it's like you don't have to make any tweaks to it. It's just kind of what it starts at.
Yeah, exactly. So a
See?
default parameter is just when you've got a function,
Mhm.
it's saying, okay, if you give me a value, I will change it to something, right? I'll change it to whatever you
Okay.
give it to me as. But if you don't give me a value, I'm just going to assume that it is 1 or 0, right? And so if you give it something, it'll say, okay, great, we're good. But if
Mhm.
you don't give it something, and if you give
Right.
it something, it'll say, great, I'll use what you get. I'll use the new information. It's changed from the norm. But if you don't give me anything, I'm just going to assume it's 1. And so if we don't pass in any value here, it's just going to
Mhm.
assume we want to increment by 1, which we typically always will.
Right.
The same,
So
go
so
ahead.
you have a start, a stop, and then you have an increment, basically, with which is how the for
Exactly.
loops work. And so
Exactly.
it always starts at 0, and
Hmm.
then you have to specify the stop, and uh the default increment is just always 1 unless specified otherwise.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the same way, so I'm going to say step, and I'm going to say default is 1.
Hmm.
But with my start, I can say default is 0. So I actually don't even have to pass in this value, right? I could just
Hmm.
say length of list of players. Now I am going to
Right.
because I don't want it to get confused. But what I can do here, and this is sort of the big thing, is when I have this len method, right? When I have this len method here, that is going to give me the length of how many values are in here, right? So it's going to go 0, 1, 2, or sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, right?
Hmm.
And so what I can do, usually a trick, oops, sorry. Usually a trick. Can you hear me? Sorry, my phone rang.
Yeah.
My headphone changed. Okay, great. Sorry about that. If I wanted to get this last value, what I could do is I could say length -1. Now I don't have to do that because remember, if I say just len of players, what that does is that is the same as saying what? Do you know what does this value mean? Or what does this value get me in this case right here? Len of list of players evaluates to.
So, so wouldn't the list of players, wouldn't that correspond to just the players, or
Yeah,
uh,
so yeah, exactly. So it's going to say list of players of whatever I pass in. So let's hypothetically say that we give it this one. When it runs len, what it's going to do is it is going to get how many items are in whatever list of players is, right? So let's pretend that we pass this in. I'll go ahead and just do that real quick. It's going to give us the length of this list, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is going to evaluate to 4.
right?
Right? Now remember, when we're dealing with range, we're just dealing with the index positions 0, 1, 2, 3. So something that's really nice is that when we are dealing with this, remember, when we set a stop, it goes all the way up to, but not including this number.
Right.
So the last place it's going to stop is 3. So we know anytime we say len of whatever list we have, it's going to go all the way to the end. All the way to the end.
Right.
Cool. So what I can do is, again, because I can actually do this, because by default, it's going to start at 0, and it's going to, if we only pass it one value, it's going to interpret that as my stop. Cool. So what this is doing is this is for I in range. We are just saying, when do I want to go through? So it's going to start at 0, and it is going to, oh, I need a for player. Sorry. In range. It is going to iterate through, and at the beginning, it's going to be a 0, right? Because we're going to start at 0. So player is going to be equal to whatever this list of players.
So why does the player have the squiggly line underneath it?
Yeah, so it should be I. So it was because it didn't, I wasn't referring to it anywhere, and so that's what it's I right here. So let me backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
When we're dealing with range, remember, we're just dealing with the index position, 0 through whatever this is. And so when we say for I, all I is going to represent is the index position, and that is going to be the number. So at the beginning, if we use our handy dandy T chart, we have I, it's going to start at 0, right? And so when I am iterating through this list, I can print list of players at position I, which is 0. And then in this case, I'm just getting the name of that, right? The name key of that. So it's just going to print messy. Then because it's a for loop, I becomes 1 because it refers in default, it steps to 1. Then I is 1, and it says print list of players, name.
And then it will
Ronaldo.
And then it, okay, right.
Okay, so that's our for loop with just a list. You get it? Make sense?
Right. So you're just iterating through the names, and then if you wanted to iterate through the ages, you would replace name with age. And if you wanted to iterate through the goals, you would just do you would replace that name with goals.
100%. Yeah, exactly.
Or if you wanted to just iterate through the entire list of dictionaries just as a whole, you would just erase the whole, you would just print list of players I and just leave it at that.
Yeah, it would get that. Exactly. So that would just get the value here. But let's say we wanted to iterate through this as well, because that's what you asked, right? How do I, within a list, also iterate through a dictionary? So when I'm doing that, I'm going to have another input, right? I'm going to have another input.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to say is 4. And now there's 3 ways we can do this. Oops, I want to say, nope. I'll see that. I could say 4. And because we're dealing with a dictionary, there's 3 ways we could do it. The first way is we can use dot items. And what dot items is going to do is it's going to go within my dictionary and it's going to retrieve all the keys and all the associated values with that.
Okay.
And as it gets those, it's going to assign them to key value. So when we are doing dot items and we're iterating through a dictionary using dot items, we have to give it, because it's going to give us 2 values, we have to name those. Now these names can be anything we want them to be. Key value is, or K, so comma V. Let's stick with that because it makes sense. Again, if another developer reads it, we want them to understand that these are the keys and values of our object or of our dictionary. But these can be anything we want it to be, in the same way that I could be unicorn or cupcake, doesn't matter.
Right.
So now we're iterating through and we're saying for key value and list of players I. So as it's at 0, it's saying, okay, for this one, get me all the keys and values.
Okay.
And then I want you to print key value.
So it's not quite as simple as just deleting one thing. We actually have to go through this whole process if we want to iterate through the whole entire list.
Yeah, if we wanted to iterate through all of these, yeah, like you said, we could have just said, print list of players I, and that's going to print the entire object. If I wanted to then grab those, if I wanted to do something different or have those and iterate through and put them different places, I could then do something like this, and that iterates, and then, maybe I do something different with the keys or with the values or something of the nature. Now, so if I were to run this, let's go ahead and run this. And let's see what we get. Say Python 3. I say office hour, PY. I didn't get anything. That's because I never called my function. Right?
Okay.
I wrote my function, worked just fine, don't have any errors, but I never called it. So we call it by calling the name. And then we pass in the value that we want it to do. We want it to be players, right? So now if I saved it, I run it, I get name, messy. That's the key, the value. And then it goes and it's iterating through each key value pair. And then it's going to say, okay, age 33 equals 70. Once this for loop is done, it says, okay, what's the next thing in this for loop? Well, there's not anything next, right? So then it iterates up and says, okay, time for Ronaldo. And then it gives us name Ronaldo. So the key value goes on to the next one. This key value goes on to the next one. This key value.
Okay.
Keeps going.
So iterate. So for I in range, list of players. 4, okay. For key in value. For key value, so that, so the key, so the so the name is the key, and then the name is the actual the name that, so the name in parentheses to the left of the quotes, that's the key, and then what's the next to it to the right, that's the value. So
Exactly.
the age is the
key value
key,
pair.
21 is the value, the goals is the key, the 120 is the value. Okay.
100%. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So for key in value in
For key
list,
value in list of players I.
for key comma value in list of players index I.
And because list of players index I, remember, because we're iterating through this for loop, all list of players is, or sorry, all I is a number. And so it's saying for list of players I, and at the beginning it's 0, so it's saying for this one. And because this is a dictionary, we can run dot items.
Right. Okay.
So I said that dot items gives me both. Now there's two other ones that, let's say we didn't want name. We know that name's going to be there. What I could do is I could just seek the value here. Let's get rid of this. But instead of using dot items, I could say dot values. And now all this is going to do is it's going to iterate through each one, and it's just going to get me the values here. It's going to skip the keys. It's just going to give me the values. So I save it, I run it, and you see I get Messi, 33,700. Ronaldo, 35,725.
So the difference between items and values is items gives you the name and then the value that it corresponds to.
The key.
Or the key and the value that it corresponds to. Values just gives you what the actual value is without the key.
Exactly. And then, as you can kind of guess, we can have something like, and we come here, we say key. And I run it. And it just gets me all the keys.
Key.
So name, age, goals. Name, age, goals. So dot keys gives me the keys.
Okay.
Dot values gives me all just the values, and dot items gives me both of them, keys and the values.
So, okay, so it kind of just dot. And I think before you were doing for key in. Okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of understand how this works now.
Yeah.
All right.
Takes a little bit of getting used to. Again, if I wanted dot items, if I wanted both, then I expect two things. And you could even say something like, this, put it in an F string to where I can run this. And see, now I get name, colon, Messi, age, colon, 33, goals, colon, that. Now, one thing to note is, remember, we're still within a not for loop, sorry. So I could say something like print, something, like this. Let's just say I wanted to separate these a little bit. Because Python uses indentions, because this is not indented like this one, it does not belong to this for loop. Right? It belongs to this one. So you'll see that if I run this, I get name, age, goals, line. Name, age, goals, line. Because what it does is we enter our for loop, comes here, sees another for loop. Once this is done, because it gets all my keys and values, then it goes on to the next line and says, what do I still need to do? Oh, I need to print this line. Okay, prints it. It gets to the end and saying, okay, I'm not done with my for loop yet. Comes back in, gets the new value, does the same thing over and over. The other way we could do it is we could say something like this. So that's using range. So I'm going to say, oops. Oops. I could also do something like, I don't want to use enumerate. I could just say for player in list of players.
Okay. Oh, one really quick question. So where could I access this recording?
In our class calendar, I will put the recording. So let me pull that up real quick just to show you. So once this class is over, I'll stop this. And then right here, here's our class calendar. And you can see this intro to Python. This was our first class. I will have it right here on the 11th at office hour. I'll have a link to it right here.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So when we dealt with range, remember, it's just dealing with the index number. It's just I is just a number, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another cool thing we can do in Python is we could just say for player in list of players. And instead of having to deal with where are we starting and the length and these numbers, we could just say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I want you to iterate through my entire list.
Okay.
Makes it a lot easier. So now player represents, it's going to start by representing this full value. And then once it's done doing whatever, it goes to this value. In the same way that we said list of players I, we don't have to do that. We could just, whatever we call it here, again, this could be unicorn. But now we can say player dot items. So still the same thing. Does it, you can see it's quite a bit less code, or maybe not less code, but a little bit easier to understand because we're not doing like of I and we're not dealing with all that. But you can see that it gets us the same result. Just a different
Okay.
way to
Mm-hmm.
iterate through. So this is us iterating through a list of dictionaries.
Okay.
Cool. Did that answer your question?
Yes, definitely.
Yay. Okay, perfect. Is there anything else I can maybe help understand or maybe that doesn't make sense?
No, actually that's it. I probably will have to watch this a few times and probably
Of
take some
course.
notes to
Of course.
actually, to really, kind of create those neural pathways in my brain to where they're really
Totally.
fortified. Um, but yeah, no, that this really absolutely helps me
Okay,
a lot.
perfect. Awesome. Well, I'll go ahead and stop the recording here.